Hi there, I'm Paul Marcel. I wanted to do a quick review of the Festool DTS 400 finishing sander, as it's one of the sanders I typically use on almost all of my projects. Now this sander is the DTS, means it's got the delta head. There is also a twin that's called the RTS that uses the rectangular pad. Now while the DTS has half the surface area sanded as the RTS, I find this to be a very useful sander, as there's so many corners to get into and the nooks and crannies, and of course you can always, it's sometimes a little bit easier to feather things. I know you're not supposed to do that with a sander, but to feather little joints with the pointed tip here. Now it's an exceptionally light sander. You won't get fatigued using this, and it is a variable speed sander, so you can set yourself going down a little bit lower if you're trying to finesse something and you don't want the aggressive paper to go too fast, too far, and you can just tone that down. Now the box itself, I mean, sustainer, simple enough to store it in. There's room for some papers in here. It does actually come with a turbo bag. I've never used it on here, although I have used it on my RS2E sander when I did some work on site once without my vacuum, and actually, at least on the RS2E, the turbo bag definitely worked pretty well, so I expected it would work just as well here. So keep this in here just in case I ever need to take it somewhere. Now, the sander, one thing that you might notice is if you were to use the sander, I mean, there's not a lot to it, right? You put the paper on, it's got the stick fix papers, so you just pop that on there, line up the holes, and away you go. Now, there is something that you could notice here on the pad, the well-used pad, is that there are some holes here that let some air sneak in from the sides. You'll notice this especially if you're sanding some wood that tends to produce some fine dust pretty easily, that you are actually from the motion going to produce dust on the outside edge of these pads. And if you watch these holes, you'll see that it wicks right in. So those aren't to allow for, say, additional air to come in to suck away the dust from here. It's actually to take care of the dust that's on the outside edges. Now these pads are replaceable. You can easily take the 4 screws and you can replace it. It's considered a consumable if you've banged it into a few too many corners, as apparently I have. The one thing interesting to note is that on a small sander like this, if you go to use it, you might find that it's going to be dancing around a little bit. It's going to produce a bad finish, and then you'll wonder what's wrong with the sander. Now this one here connects to a D27 hose, the regular tool hose that you're used to, but one of the things you have to do with this sander is you have to turn down the volume of air from your CT dust extractor. If you have it on too high, you're going to find that it's going to want to dance because you're generating a vacuum and losing the vacuum really fast as it moves around. And also you'll find that if sometimes things will get stuck in there and you get these little additional swirl marks. But if you turn down your air, you're going to be doing really well. Now just to give you an idea, let me get, I knew I had my board here somewhere. I'll just give you an idea of how much suction you can get if you have your dust extractor on full. Obviously, that's more than you need. In my case, I tend to run this, I turn the volume of the dust extractor down all the way, and then I start my sanding, and if I start to see a little bit of dust built up, I turn it up just a little bit. I tend to want to err on the side of not having enough extraction than having too much, since too much always ends up giving me some swirl marks. I don't notice until a little later, and it gets me grumpy. So there it is. Not much to it, but it's a great little sander. I have to say that when I got this, I thought I was only going to be using it for corners because that's predominantly what it's going to excel at. But I find that it's so nice and light that I use it on a lot for rails and stiles, since you're going to get a good balance point taking up most of the pad. So there you have it.